PSC Tamuyu, PSs from other ministries, the President of ISA, Rosemary, Minister Councillor, and esteemed diplomats, members of academia, colleagues from the UN sister agencies, partners, members of the press, may I simply say and follow the protocol already established, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Let me start by sincerely thanking the International Relations Association of Zambia for convening this roundtable, the fourth edition. And I'm honored by the invitation to contribute to this timely and important discussion in my capacity as a representative for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, whose core mandate is the protection of the most vulnerable and those forced to flee. This gathering indeed reflects a growing and welcome recognition that climate change is no longer only an environmental issue. It is a security, humanitarian, and development issue, as well as one that requires collective and strategic action from all of us. From UNHCR's perspective, climate change rarely acts alone. It interacts with conflict, weak governance, poverty, and inequality, compounding existing vulnerabilities of already vulnerable people. So as we discuss today about policies, finance, or global frameworks, we must remember to think of the people, and let's put them at the center of our discussions and dialogue. People with lives shaped by forces beyond their control, and lives that depend on the decisions made in rooms like this one. The issue we are discussing today, the intersection of conflict, climate change, and climate finance gap, is no longer distant. It is immediate and it's visible, not only around the globe, but also here in Zambia. The 2024 National Drought Emergency was a stark reminder. Crops failed, water sources declined, electricity became unreliable, and livelihoods were disrupted. Families across the country felt the strain, and for the most vulnerable, survival meant exhausting already limited resources. And you can imagine the shock and impact for those forced to flee and are already in a strained situation. Refugees arrive in Zambia, they come already affected by conflicts and often climate shocks as well. They seek safety and opportunity to rebuild their lives. Increasingly, they arrive in communities that are themselves under climate stress. When drought affected Zambia, it affected everyone. But refugees often feel it more acutely because they are already starting with less. This is the intersection we must understand. Conflict, climate change, and forced displacement are sadly converging and sadly reinforcing each other. At UNHCR, we see this not only here in Zambia, but along displacement routes. Our reports, No Escape and No Escape 2, which I invite you all to read, shows that for many refugees, there is no safe stage of their journey. People face exploitation, violence, and abuse, and climate shocks further limit their options and increase their vulnerability. In Zambia, the impacts are very clear. When drought reduces agricultural output, food prices rise. When food prices rise, vulnerable households struggle. As opportunities shrink, especially for young people, mobility becomes a coping strategy. People move again, not by choice, but out of necessity. At this point, it is paramount to recognize and applaud Zambia's long and proud history of hosting refugees. Probably the sound out there is applauding Zambia's long history of hospitality, rooted in solidarity and Pan-African responsibility. Despite various climate and economic pressures, Zambia continues to uphold its commitment to hosting refugees. This is commendable, but this solidarity must be matched with support from all the partners and all of us. This brings me now to the climate finance gap. Globally, billions are committed to climate action, billions of dollars. Yet, too little of this finance reaches countries like Zambia, despite they are minimally contributing to the climate impact. The refugee hosting communities within them, much more lesser. When climate finance does not reach vulnerable people, they cannot adapt, they cannot build resilience, and the cycle of vulnerability deepens. UNHCR's operational experience in Africa, as well as in Zambia, in particular in remote rural borderlands, makes this clear. We see what happens when support is insufficient, but we also see what works collectively. According to 2024 climate action results, targeted investments deliver tangible impacts. Solar-powered water systems are improving access for both refugees and hosting communities. Clean energy solutions are reducing pressure on natural resources. Climate-resilient livelihoods are helping families withstand shocks and rebuild back their lives. Those are practical, scalable, cost-effective solutions that demonstrate our collective value added in linking humanitarian or forced displacement response with climate resilience. Over the past 2 years, UNHCR has significantly expanded its engagement with multilateral climate funds. We are working with the Green Climate Fund in countries like Tanzania and South Sudan on livelihoods and resilience. New projects are developed in Chad, Ethiopia, and Syria. We have formalized partnerships with the Green Climate Fund and Adaptation Fund, which finances projects in developing countries that are parties to the Kyoto Protocol and vulnerable to climate change. Through strong partnerships with host governments like Zambia, as well as traditional donors and multilateral climate funds, I'm sure you are representing a number of them today here, the private sector, and individuals. We are working to ensure that refugees and host communities are not left behind. Since I have seen the Danish representative in the list for making speech, maybe I can share an example of what Denmark is playing as a critical role in financing innovative approaches to refugee resilience. In Uganda, the Refugee Resilience Initiative program supporting climate-smart agriculture, nature-based solutions, and green innovation is ranging from climate-smart farming and reforestation, is enabling and strengthening livelihood while reducing environmental pressure on refugees and the host communities. Building on this momentum and with Denmark's again support, here with UNHCR Zambia, we are developing agriculture roadmap aimed at advancing refugee livelihood and their hosting communities in ways that are both economically viable and environmentally sustainable. This is the kind of targeted, forward-looking investment that demonstrates how climate finance can deliver real, lasting impact in displacement settings. This progress shows that climate finance can reach displaced settings, remote rural areas, but it needs to be scaled up. And it must include countries like Zambia, which faces severe climate change impacts, causing increasingly frequent droughts, dry spell, and floods, resulting in food insecurity and economic losses. This is where your role is critical, all of you. As diplomats and policymakers, you shape how climate finance is prioritized and delivered. Ensure climate finance reaches refugee hosting countries like Zambia, not as an afterthought, but as a priority. Let's join hands for action and to integrate our different initiatives and approaches. Climate action, development, and humanitarian response are interconnected, and they must be addressed together. We must invest in both refugees and their hosting communities, because resilience is built collectively. Finally, we must ensure that the voices of affected communities, the people that I started in my speech with, are included in decision-making processes. In closing, the 2024 drought that affected Zambia reminded us of our shared vulnerability, but also of resilience and solidarity. The realities captured in the UNHCR reports I mentioned earlier, again, I appeal you read them. No Escape and No Escape 2 remind us of the risks of inaction. We now have an opportunity to close the climate finance gap, align our efforts, and ensure those most affected by conflict and climate change are not left behind. Because this is not only about finance, it's about fairness, responsibility, and the future we choose to build together. Thank you for your attention.